Rowan Callister had one principle he built his entire career around. Never let the work speak louder than your silence, because the work will always outlast the noise. He was 47 years old and had spent the better part of 2 decades turning distressed commercial properties in Charlotte, North Carolina, into something worth owning. Not flashy developments. Not the kind of glass towers that go up overnight and leak by year 3. The kind of slow, deliberate rehabilitation that most developers had neither the patience nor the stomach for. He bought buildings other people had given up on, studied their bones, and rebuilt them from the inside out. He had a reputation in the industry for being methodical to the point of being almost unsettling. His contractor once told him that working with Rowan was like watching someone solve a puzzle they had already solved once before. They were just doing it again, slowly, so you could follow along. He had 2 daughters he adored, a modest house in Dilworth he had owned outright since he was 39, and a marriage he had believed, right up until the morning of April 3rd, was the best thing he had ever quietly held together. That was before he found the folder. If you have ever trusted someone completely enough that it never even occurred to you to question them, and then watched that trust collapse, not in a dramatic scene but in the slow recognition of a pattern you had been too close to see, stay with this. Because what Rowan Callister discovered, and what he chose to do about it, is the kind of story that changes the way you think about the word foundation. Charlotte has a particular quality in early spring. The dogwoods along the side streets bloom a full 2 weeks before anyone is ready for them, and the mornings carry that brief, perfect coolness that disappears by noon. It was that kind of morning when Rowan sat at the kitchen island in his house on Euclid Avenue, going over a cost summary for a mixed-use renovation in Noda. Coffee going warm beside him, glasses he had recently, and reluctantly started needing perched near the end of his nose. He had a meeting with his structural engineer at 8:30 and liked having his questions organized before he walked in. His wife Yvette had left for her Pilates class at 6, or she had said she was leaving for Pilates. He had not thought about the distinction until later. The folder was in the second drawer of the home office. The one they had agreed years ago was his space. He was looking for the title documentation on a property he had acquired in 2019, a piece of paper he had filed correctly and then not thought about until now. He found the folder by accident, right at the front of the drawer, slightly out of alignment, with everything else in a way that told him it had been placed there in a hurry. He opened it because it had no label. He had a rule about unlabeled folders: always check. Inside was a series of bank statements. Not his, not joint accounts. An account he had never seen, in Yvette's name alone, opened 14 months earlier. The balance on the most recent statement was $312,000. The deposit history showed consistent transfers, some of them from accounts he recognized, some from sources he did not. There was also a screenshot of a text conversation. He recognized the name at the top: Donovan, as in Donovan Freely, who had been Rowan's business attorney for 6 years. He set the folder down on the desk, very carefully, as though it were something breakable. Then he sat in the chair and looked out the window at the dogwood in the backyard for a long time. The thing about a calm exterior is that people often mistake it for indifference. Rowan's second daughter, Kezia, who was 17 and understood her father better than most adults, once told her older sister that their dad was the kind of person who got quieter the more serious something was. She said if he ever went completely silent, that was when you should start paying attention. He went completely silent. By 7:15, he had taken photographs of every document in the folder, replaced everything exactly as he had found it, and made a single phone call. Not to a friend, not to a family member, to a woman named Constance Webb, a forensic accountant he had worked with once during a commercial dispute 3 years earlier. He had kept her number because she was the kind of professional who solved things without drama and without leaks. He reached her voicemail and left a message that was precise, brief, and gave nothing away. Then he went to his meeting. He sat across from his structural engineer and asked every question he had written down. His hands were steady. His voice was level. Nobody in that room would have known, looking at him, that his understanding of his own life had shifted on its axis in the previous 2 hours. That is not composure as a performance. That is composure as a survival skill, learned by a man who had taught himself, over decades of difficult work and harder losses, that panic is just clarity moving too fast to be useful. He drove home that afternoon and made dinner. Pasta simple. The kind Yvette always said she preferred on weeknights. She arrived at 6:47, kissed his cheek in the kitchen the way she had done for 11 years, and told him she'd had a long day. He asked what made it long. She said just things. He nodded. They ate together at the table, and he asked about her sister's upcoming visit. And she asked about the Noda project, and it was exactly like every other weeknight, and also completely different from every other weeknight, and only one of them at that table knew the difference. Constance Webb called back the following morning. She met him at a coffee shop in Plaza Midwood, arriving 5 minutes early, which told him she had taken the call seriously. She was 58 years old, methodical in the way of people who had spent their careers finding the things other people had tried to hide, and she listened to everything Rowan laid out without taking a single note until he stopped talking. Then she picked up her pen. "This is going to take me 2 weeks," she said. "Possibly 3. Don't move anything. Don't signal anything. Don't change a single financial behavior." She looked at him over her coffee cup. "And get yourself a family attorney. Today, not next week." He got one that afternoon. A woman named Paulette Sims, who had been recommended to him by someone who told him she was the attorney you wanted if the other side had already been planning longer than you had. Paulette read the photographs of the statements and the text screenshot and was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at him. "How long have you been married?" 11 years. "How long has Donovan Freely been your attorney?" 6. She wrote something down. Then she looked at him in the way of someone who has just identified the specific shape of a problem. "Do you have children together?" 2 daughters, 15 and 17, both biologically mine. She is their stepmother. Their mother passed away 8 years ago. Paulette paused at that. The calculation behind her eyes shifted slightly. She wrote something else. Then she uncapped a second pen, set it beside the first one, and said, "Tell me everything you know about how your assets are currently titled." The next 3 weeks were the strangest of Rowan's life, and he had lived through some genuinely difficult ones. He went to work every day. He came home every evening. He had dinner with Yvette, and asked about her day, and told her about his, and watched something on television. They both said they enjoyed, but that neither of them was really watching. He managed the Noda project and 2 others. He took his blood pressure medication with his morning coffee, the prescription he had been on for 18 months, the one Yvette thought he sometimes forgot, but that he had never once forgotten, because he was not a man who forgot things that mattered for his health. He did not sleep well, but he had not slept well for longer than he had realized, and now that he understood why, the sleeplessness felt less like a symptom and more like his body having already known something his conscious mind had not yet caught up to. Constance called him on a Wednesday afternoon in the 3rd week. She had found 11 separate transfers totaling $387,000, moved out of business operating accounts in increments small enough to stay below automatic flagging thresholds. She had found a lease on a furnished apartment in South End, signed 8 months ago, that was not Yvette's name but matched a secondary email address Yvette used for what she described as newsletter subscriptions. She had found communication records suggesting Donovan had been providing Yvette with information about Rowan's asset structure for at least 14 months, the same 14 months as the private account. Rowan sat in his truck in the parking lot of a hardware store and listened to all of it without saying a word. When Constance finished, She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very carefully, "Rowan, I want you to know that what I am describing here is not just a marital situation. There are elements of this that constitute potential financial fraud. I am going to need to prepare a full documentation package, and I think your attorney needs to know the scope of it before anything moves." He thanked her. His voice was level. He ended the call, sat for a while in the parking lot looking at nothing particular, then started the truck and drove home. Yvette was already there. She was on the back porch on the phone, laughing at something. The particular laugh she used when she was performing ease rather than feeling it. He had just never had reason to notice the distinction before. He went inside, changed his shirt, started a pot of coffee, and texted Paulette. "We need to meet tomorrow morning. It is a particular and quiet devastation, watching someone perform ordinary life with you while running a separate one alongside it. Psychologists call it compartmentalization, the capacity to partition emotional reality into sealed rooms that do not communicate with each other. In some forms, it is a coping mechanism. In this form, it was something else. It was the choice to treat a person you had promised to be honest with as a problem to be managed. And Rowan, sitting at his own kitchen island with his coffee going cold, understood for the first time that he had been managed for a very long time. He was not angry. Or he was, but the anger was deep and slow and did not reach his surface. What was on his surface was something quieter and more permanent. The resolved understanding of a man who had just finished identifying the actual shape of the problem and was now entirely focused on what to build in its place. What he had built before Yvette, and what she had not fully understood, was that Rowan Callister never held his most important things where they could be easily seen. The meeting with Paulette lasted 2 hours. When he walked out of her office, they had a plan. Not a dramatic plan, not a vengeful one. A precise one, structured around the same principle Rowan had applied to every distressed property he had ever worked on. Understand what you actually own, secure what cannot be replaced, and let everything else follow its natural course. He filed for divorce 12 days later. Yvette found out the same way Rowan had filed it, quietly, through the proper channels with no advance announcement. A process server arrived at the house on a Tuesday morning while Rowan was at the notice site. She called him immediately, her voice at a register he had not heard before, something between fury and the specific panic of someone whose timeline has been disrupted. He did not answer. He texted back, briefly, "Paulette Sims is handling everything on my end. Please direct your attorney to contact her." The responding message was long. He read it once, replied with Paulette's office number, and went back to his walkthrough. What followed, over the next 6 weeks, was a negotiation. Yvette's attorney pushed for a 50-50 split of marital assets. Paulette let them push. She was patient in the particular way of someone who knows exactly what the other side does not know yet, and who is waiting for the right procedural moment to introduce it. That moment came at the 4th mediation session. Yvette sat across the table in a cream blazer, her attorney beside her, composed in the way of someone who has been told by the people around her that she has a strong position. She had arrived 12 minutes late and had not acknowledged the delay. She looked at Rowan across the table with the expression of someone who expected a negotiation and was prepared to win it. Paulette set a document on the table, then a second one, then a bound exhibit package. She slid to both the mediator and opposing counsel simultaneously. The first document was Constance's full financial forensics report, itemized, time-stamped, cross-referenced with bank records, email records, and the building access logs of the South End apartment. The second document, named Donovan Freely as a co-respondent in a civil fraud claim Rowan was prepared to file separately, but which was being disclosed at this stage as a matter of procedural completeness. The exhibit package contained 11 months of communication records between Yvette and Donovan that Constance had obtained through proper legal discovery channels, beginning 14 months after their marriage and ending approximately 6 weeks ago. Yvette's attorney read the first 2 pages and asked for a recess. They took 40 minutes. When they came back, the energy in the room had changed completely. Yvette's composure was still present, but it had a different quality, the quality of something being held rather than something being felt. Her attorney spoke carefully, in the measured language of someone who has just recalibrated their entire understanding of their client's position. The mediation concluded that afternoon. The terms were not what Yvette's attorney had proposed. They reflected, with quiet precision, what the documentation supported. Rowan did not watch Yvette's face when the final numbers were read into the record. He was looking at a point on the table, his hands folded, his expression the same as it had been when he arrived. His daughters did not know he was in that room. They knew their parents were divorcing. He had told them himself, separately, with care, on a Saturday afternoon over coffee at the kitchen island, and he had answered every question they asked and told them the truth about everything he could responsibly tell. A 15 and 17-year-old, which was. This was not something either of them caused. This was not something either of them could have prevented, and there was not going to be a version of this that required them to choose sides. His older daughter Maren had nodded in the careful way she had, which meant she was absorbing more than she was showing. His younger daughter Kezia had sat quietly for a moment and then said, "Dad, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what." He looked at her. "You always get quieter when something is serious," she said. "You got very quiet about 6 weeks ago." He looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he said, "You were paying attention." "She was," she said. "She always was." There is a particular cruelty that he had not anticipated in the weeks after a legal resolution, when the practical shape of a new life begins to make itself visible. Not dramatic cruelty, not the kind that announces itself. The slow kind. The kind you feel on a Tuesday when you realize you have cooked dinner for 4 people out of 11 years of habit, and you are standing in a kitchen that is suddenly yours alone, and the extra portions are just going to sit there. He moved through it. That was the only accurate word. Not above it, not around it, through. He took on a new project, a 1940s office building in Belmont that needed everything. He took it on because the work had always been the thing that gave structure to difficult seasons, and because there was something specific and grounding about standing inside a building that had been neglected and understanding, from its bones, what it was still capable of becoming. Kezia came to the site with him one Saturday. She walked through the empty rooms the way she walked through everything, quietly, looking at things from multiple angles, asking questions that were better than a doublest. She stopped in front of a crumbling plaster wall and asked what it had originally been. He told her. She looked at it for a while. "Why do you fix things other people give up on?" she asked. He thought about that. "Because the problem is almost never as permanent as it looks from the outside," he said. "Usually someone just stopped being patient with it." She looked at the wall for another moment. Then she looked at him. "That's kind of what you did with us too," she said. "After Mom died, you didn't stop being patient." He did not say anything for a while. Then he put his arm around her shoulders, and they stood in the empty room, looking at the wall in the particular silence of 2 people who have understood something simultaneously and do not need to say it out loud. The civil claim against Donovan Freely was filed 8 weeks after the divorce finalized. Paulette had been precise about the timing, allowing the divorce proceedings to conclude fully before introducing the secondary legal action. The claim was detailed, well documented, and not the kind of thing a practicing attorney could easily dismiss or absorb without consequence. Donovan's firm placed him on administrative leave within 72 hours of the filing becoming public record. His license was referred for review by the state bar. Rowan did not follow the coverage of it. He was aware of the general shape of events because Paulette kept him informed, but he had made a deliberate choice not to track it closely because it was not the part of this that required his attention. Yvette's financial situation restructured itself over the following months, in the way that situations do when they have been built on assumptions that turned out not to be true. The furnished apartment in South End had a lease expiration that fell inconveniently. The private account, once subjected to the scrutiny of legal discovery, reflected significantly less than Constance's original estimate had suggested, because a portion of it had apparently already been moved in anticipation of a settlement that did not arrive on the expected terms. The lifestyle she had been building, on the margin between what Rowan knew about and what she had been quietly redirecting, required a particular income to sustain. That income was no longer arriving. He was not the source of her difficulty. Her own choices were. That distinction mattered to him, not for moral satisfaction, but because accuracy mattered to him in everything, and it was accurate. He heard, through a mutual acquaintance, the kind of information that arrives without being sought, that she had reached out to Marin twice and to Kezia once. The messages had been careful, apologetic in structure if not entirely in content. Kezia had read hers, sat with it for 2 days, and then shown it to her father. Not because she needed him to tell her what to do, but because she was 17, and this was hard, and he was her father, and that was the kind of relationship they had built. He read it. He handed it back. "What do you want to do?" he asked. She said she didn't know yet. He said that was fine, she had time. He said whatever she decided he would support, and that the decision was entirely hers. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said in the message that she was sorry things turned out this way. Not that she was sorry for what she did, just for how it turned out. Rowan was quiet. "That's a different thing," Kezia said. "Yes," he said, "it is." She folded the message back up and put it in her pocket and didn't say anything more about it that evening. But before she went to bed, she stopped in the doorway of the living room where he was reading and said, "Dad, I just want you to know, whatever happens with all of this, you showed us how to handle things with dignity, and that's what we're going to remember." He looked at her over his reading glasses. "Even when it was hard," she said. "Maybe, especially when it was hard." He did not fully trust his voice right then, so he just nodded. She said good night. He heard her door close down the hall. He sat in the living room for a while, with his book open and unread. Outside the Dilworth house, the spring evening had gone blue and warm, and the street was quiet in the way of a neighborhood that has been lived in long enough to stop performing for itself. A car passed slowly. Somewhere down the block, a neighbor's wind chimes moved in a small, undramatic way. The refrigerator hummed, the ceiling fan turned. The house was his, had been for 8 years held in a structure his own father had helped him understand when he was 29 years old, and just beginning to learn the difference between owning something and protecting it. The way assets could be layered and titled and sheltered not out of suspicion, but out of the simple practical intelligence of a man who knew that the most important things needed to be held in ways that casual attention could not easily reach. Yvette had known he was careful with his properties. She had not known how the structures actually worked. He had tried to explain it. Once, early in their marriage, the same way you explain something to someone who is nodding without actually listening. She had called it overly complicated and changed the subject. He had not raised it again. The Belmont building was coming along. He could see it when he closed his eyes, the way he could always see a project from the inside, even when it was still mostly plastered dust and exposed wiring. He had a good crew. He had a tenant lined up, a local architecture firm that had been looking for a building with character and had called him on a referral. The project would be finished by fall. He was already thinking about the next one. Marin had told him on a Sunday afternoon over coffee that she was applying for an urban planning program at NC State. She had been interested in how cities were shaped for years, in the quiet way she had of being interested in things before she announced them. She showed him her application essay on her laptop. He read it, standing at the kitchen island, the way he read everything important, slowly, without rushing it. She had written about watching him work, about being 8 years old and sitting in his truck outside job sites while he went in, and about the way buildings looked different to her now because of what he had shown her was possible inside them. She had written about the particular patience required to restore something rather than replace it. He read the last paragraph twice. Then he set the laptop down and looked at his daughter. "You never told me you remembered those days," he said. She looked at him with the particular steadiness she had had since she was a child. "Dad," she said, "I remember all of it." He thought about the spring morning, when everything had shifted, the unlabeled folder in the second drawer, the long drive home from the hardware store parking lot. He thought about 11 years and the specific work of rebuilding something after the ground you thought you were standing on turns out to have been different than you understood. He thought about 2 daughters who had watched him stay present through a hard season and had, without being told to, decided that was how they intended to handle hard things too. That is the inheritance that does not show up in any legal document. The posture, the patience, the decision made quietly and again to keep building even when the work is harder than anyone watching from the outside will ever fully know. Some things are larger than language. Some truths are only visible from the inside of them. Rowan Callister turned off the kitchen light and went to check on the wind chime that had been loose on the porch since February. He fixed it in about 4 minutes with a small piece of wire and his hands, and the particular satisfaction of a man who still finds meaning in solving small problems with care. He stood on the porch in the warm Charlotte evening for a little while after that. The neighborhood was quiet. The dogwoods along the street had long finished blooming and gone back to being just trees. Somewhere nearby a door opened and closed, the ordinary sound of someone coming home. He went inside. The lights were on in both of his daughter's rooms. He could hear the low music from Kezia's side of the hallway and the soft click of Marin's keyboard on the other. He stood in the hall for a moment, between those 2 sounds, in the quiet center of the life he had protected without ever needing to announce it. Then he went to bed. He slept well.